Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, 4R Nutrients in Action, Real-Time Tissue Analysis for Season-Changing Insights, presented by Picketa Systems. I'm Robin Sittberg of Meister Media Worldwide, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. This webinar has been approved for a half CEU credit in nutrient management from CCA. It's important to remember that at some point during this webinar, an attendance poll will be sent, and you must respond to it to receive credit. Once you respond, or if you respond when the webinar is finished, you'll receive an email with a QR code for reporting your credit. You simply scan the QR code and submit it. Please do not close your browser before the event is fully ended, or you will not receive the email with the QR code. And this is also for viewers watching the archived webinar. We will have time for questions at the end of the webinar, so if at any time during the presentation you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and type it in your question panel at the lower corner of your screen and click submit. You can do this at any time during the webinar, but we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Zach Andersen. He's Vice President of Sales for Picketa Systems, and he's a founder and sales leader with a background in electrical and computer engineering. At Picketa, he splits his time between understanding the challenges of crop advisors and precision ag specialists and doing hands-on real field research in the summer. Zach's expertise lies in driving product development that aligns with customers' needs. Our second speaker is Shawn Brenneman, and he's been Director of Commercial Growth and Strategy for Eastern Canada at CanGrow Crop Solutions for the past 3 years. Shawn has long experience in agriculture, having worked with Syngenta Canada for 15 years and in ag retail for 10 years. He's been a CCA for Ontario with 4R nutrient management and resistance management specialties, and he's done that for 20 years. Shawn has also served as director for the Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association, and he lives in Lambton County in Ontario. So with that, I am pleased to turn the presentation over to Zach.
Perfect. Thank you for the nice intro, Robin. You sound super official there. I like it. First of all, thank you, everyone. I think there's about 119 of you in here. I see some familiar names in the list and some names that I don't know. So I'm super excited to have everyone here to, take some time and listen to us talk about plant tissue testing and tissue analysis. I'm very excited. And the goal of the webinar today is to talk about the importance of plant tissue testing to acquire nutrient data, how it's a necessary component to anyone looking to implement 4R methodology. In an ideal world, all growers follow 4R, but we know that's this, and it's usually not the case. But we feel like tissue testing is something that can get growers closer to that ideal scenario. If you're trying to if you're looking at nutrient source, timing, rates, and placement, all those things are crucial to fertility, but without any means of tracking the uptake of your crop, how do you know that you're implementing best practices effectively? So I thought I'd kick things off with a poll. It's pretty on theme here. So I'll send you guys a poll right now and tell me what you think this deficiency on this crop might be. Now, Robin, I'm not sure here if I'm going to see the results. I'll give maybe 30 seconds for people to answer. I'm not sure I'm seeing them come in. Oh, there we go. Beautiful. Right on. I'll give it a couple more seconds here, but yeah, the idea is, a lot of you guys have a lot of years, and I'm saying I'm using guys, but a lot of the people in the audience, agronomists and crop advisors, have tons of experience. There's probably hundreds of years of combined experience in this webinar alone today. So a big part of your job is identifying some of these deficiencies, and I'm sure over the years you've developed a very good gut feeling as to what deficiencies might be, and there's probably some that are more common in your area. So I'm not doubting your ability to diagnose, but the point is, and I'll send the results right now so that you can see, and if you didn't get time to answer, well, there's no issue. But we see that about 35% of you answered sulfur, 26% of you answered nitrogen, and let's go to the result here. So this is a sulfur deficient corn plant. Sulfur and nitrogen deficiencies are pretty notorious to look alike. So there's no shame if you answered one of those. Maybe if you answered some of the other answers. I'm just kidding. The reality is just that without any context, it's kind of hard for an agronomist to diagnose a plant and a problem with a plant. If I told you this corn plant was planted in super sandy soil with low organic matter, that there was, a big outburst of rain 3 weeks in a row after planting, and then it was followed by a cold snap right away, then you'd probably start getting more context and ideas as to what that deficiency might be, right? And that's kind of the point that we're trying to make here, is that along with your gut check and along with context is where you're able to kind of diagnose problems more accurately. So the main problem that we're seeing out there right now is that farming isn't getting any easier. Agronomists are there to help growers. Growers all have different needs. Input prices are going up, commodity prices are down. It's a pretty bad combination. On top of that, every growing season is different. Weather might act up in different ways every single year. Growing conditions change. And your job as crop advisors is to kind of make sense of that puzzle and to put the pieces together for a puzzle that's changing from one season to the next, right? So it's very hard to tap into the true potential of a program that's really well ran and to kind of follow that 4R nutrient mindset, right? And this is something that I'm sure everyone here knows, but you have a very limited window in the North American growing season to make a difference on crop nutrition once your fertilizer is applied. So 60 to 80% of the nutrition happens in a 60-day, 70-day window. And if you break it down, you get about 1% of the nutrients absorbed each day. And this is with relation to corn. But if you do the math on that, it kind of gets pretty striking. So 60 to 80% of the nutrient uptake happens from V4 to silking. Nutrient deficiencies during this period can cost up of 1% of the targeted yield or the yield potential. So if you're using, for example, a hybrid or, a corn that's, marketed as 198 bushel per acre potential corn at $3.40 a bushel, a deficiency can cost the grower about $6 to $7 acres a day. 6 to 7 acres per acre per day, right? So leaving a nutrient deficiency unchecked can be a very expensive problem for the grower. Same goes for soybeans. I won't linger on the numbers too long, but again, very limited window to have an impact on the crop. And if you let it go unchecked, you're losing 1% every day. And that kind of translates to around $6, $5 to $6 a day for 50 bushel an acre soybeans. So our goal and the reason we're hosting this webinar today is to go over how tissue analysis can be helpful to navigate all those issues. We want to show how tissue analysis can be a useful tool for agronomy when logistical and maybe financial constraints are removed from the process. We're also going to show you guys real life examples of how it's been implemented. Shawn is here today with us, and he was nice enough to come to this webinar and tell you guys about how he's been using tissue analysis in his operation to bring value to his growers. So yeah, we'll go over some of the concepts that we're seeing out in the field and the ways that tissue analysis is an asset when used properly. So right now, agronomists got to wear many hats throughout the season, but the main goal, like I said, is to support growers into reaching their goals, whatever that may be. Each grower has a different situation, different budget, different expectations. So you kind of have to manage those as well. But providing insights and recommendations tailored to every single grower is what keeps agronomy stimulating, but it's also the biggest challenge for crop advisors. So some of you here might have 30 harvests under your belt. Like I said, you might have been in the game for a long time. So I'm sure you have a really good gut feeling for what issues might be and how to grow a good crop in your specific growing conditions. And on top of that, you probably have access to a plethora of different tools. I'm sure you're doing soil testing, you might be using NVDI indexes, you might be using drones, whatever that may be. And tissue sampling might be part of that, all part of that strategy as well. But in theory, insights that come directly from the plant, like a tissue test, is a good data point to base a recommendation out of, or at least get a better sense for what the recommendation needs to look like. The problem is all the agronomists that we talk to say they avoid tissue analysis because results come too late and you miss the window to kind of make a difference in yield anyways. So they stay away from doing them altogether. So I'll send you a little survey question here and you guys tell me if you agree with that. And that can be for a variety of different reasons. Like maybe there's no labs in your area. Maybe growers have never really seen a real reason to do tissue testing. Like maybe they don't have trouble with in-season nutrition. But yeah, the consensus sometimes is that since results take long and it's not really part of the plan, agronomists stay away from implementing it as a stable in their crop management strategy. So I'm getting a good split here on the answers. Let me see what the audience is at. Yeah. Okay. Give you a couple seconds. I'll move on to the next slide. I'll let you guys answer that. So that means that as an agronomist, you're left to diagnose issues without direct data because you can't justify tissue tests, so you're not getting feedback from the plant itself. So you got to use indirect measurements to make a recommendation, right? You might be basing off soil tests, you might be basing off previous harvests. So, you know, you have to kind of go off of indirect data points, and I'll show you what the survey says. I think it's a 50-50 split, so that's very interesting and quite useful. So thanks for answering that. But yeah, so on top of all that, your growers have to trust that you're making a good recommendation, and, you know, not having direct feedback from the plant itself and just using your gut might add risk to the whole situation, since you're kind of making a recommendation without any direct feedback. It kind of gets hard to set expectations. Whereas if you have proof that a plant is deficient in a certain nutrient, it becomes a whole lot easier to move in and make a recommendation. And this is something I thought I'd add just to provide a bit more context. So time is money. So I figured this would be relevant, right? This is a breakdown of what it costs to produce corn in Iowa. And you'll notice that fertilizer, seed, and chemical makes up around a third of the graph. So it's safe to assume that growers are only thinking about crop advisors a third of the time. I'd wager that the fifth of the pie chart there that covers machinery doesn't reflect how much time growers spend thinking about machinery, but that's beside the point. The point is that when you manage to get growers thinking about fertility and seed and agronomy, you have to make sure you're maximizing the time that you have. So insights are valuable. You know, they make the time that you get with the growers more valuable. So if you can provide value and ways to mitigate risk within that time frame, I think you're ahead of the game in that regard. So due to all the reasons mentioned and kind of the sentiment that I got from the audience, 50-50 split, some of you guys think tissue analysis is a worthwhile practice, others think it isn't. We've been driven to find a better way to conduct tissue analysis. So at first, we thought that simply doing it faster and in a more portable way would be the end-all be-all, and we kind of solve tissue analysis for everyone, and everyone would be on their way, and it would be implemented everywhere. But the more we talked with agronomists and growers across North America, we saw that there's more potential for the data point itself. And we realized that making tissue data readily available kind of unlocks potential for your nutrient management strategy. So the takeaways that we've gone to after a couple of years implementing this technology is that, one, tissue testing lowers your risk of under or over fertilizing a crop. And we saw earlier that missing a deficiency and leaving it unchecked for a long period of time can make or break the profitability of a field. So mitigating that risk is always a good thing. Then gathering data on the nutrients that are being uptaken in the field by your crop makes the recommendations that you're providing in season, it makes them inherently data-driven. So it increases the confidence level between the agronomist and the grower. And then the third point is that agronomy is changing. You guys probably feel like, you know, things are all up in the air right now with the way that prices are going and tariffs and, you know, unrest and what's going to happen this season. The point is, since agronomy is changing, the job of the crop advisor is also changing. And we feel that a high touch, high feedback service model is a great way to differentiate yourselves through these changing times. So another poll question for you guys here. We're really wondering, and this is something that I ask all the time when I'm talking to people that want to know more about our technology, but if you had to choose one of the options below, what would you say would be the biggest challenge when it comes to managing nutrient deficiencies in season? I'll give you guys some time. Some people tell us that identifying deficiencies early enough to make an impact on and fixing them is a big problem. Some people talk about timing the right nutrient application. So for row crops, growers might only be taking 1 or 2 passes during the season, so timing nutrients becomes a challenge. Some folks tell us that deciding where to apply the nutrients is a problem, so maybe you're using zone management. And some people just have a hard time seeing the value in trying to correct deficiencies at all, and that's usually quite crop dependent. So it seems that a lot of you are saying that catching deficiencies early enough is an issue, and that's pretty much in line with what we have. And it's interesting that, I'll show you the results here. I'll give you a bit of time, but I'm seeing the majority of the answers split between A and D. So some of you are saying it's hard to provide or to communicate the value of different practices with your growers. So this is very much in line with what we're seeing, and it's right in line with the problem that we're trying to solve, right? So to go into more detail, into more technical detail here, since we've started working with agronomists and growers, we've seen 4 effective ways of implementing tissue analysis into your program. The first rung on the ladder, if you may, is just using a tissue test to diagnose a suspected issue. So let's say your grower called you and sends you a picture of their corn, and it looks like the picture I had up in the first slide. You'd use a tissue test to kind of get a sense of what was going on with that crop. Then the second, the level above that, would be a scheduled sampling program for periodic checkpoints at key growth stages. So in corn, that might look like V4, V6 pre-tasseling. So then you have a profile of how the nutrients behaved throughout the season. A third way we're seeing tissue testing as a tool is side-by-side trials. So I'm sure you guys have done your fair share of trials in your careers. Having another kind of marker or data point to go about the success of the product that you're applying through nutrient testing is a good way to communicate the value of the product that's on trial. And then the fourth one, and this is for really gung-ho agronomists or growers, but if you're into precision agriculture through zone management, using tissue tests with relation to the zones is a good way to kind of get direct feedback on what's happening with that strategy. So like I said, the entry level of tissue test is a diagnostic test. In most cases, this is how people do tissue tests right now. The focus is to uncover issues and not really to maximize potential. But a single data point can be hard to use as a solid piece of information to guide a decision, but it's better than just going off your gut or off of indirect data, right? So a good benefit to your grower base can get from doing these diagnostics is that if you see a problem in the field and some of the growers that you work with are in the same area, then that can raise a flag to check for that same problem in adjacent fields, right? So this is, to me, the gold standard in tissue sampling. It's a regular sampling program. The idea is to monitor nutrient levels throughout key growth stages so that issues can be caught before considerable damage occurs. Not only does this let you fix problems, but it also gives you feedback on the effectiveness of the plan that you put in place at planting. And it gives you direct feedback on how the crop is responding to the current growing conditions. So you can see here on the slide where I think this is a sulfur graph. We were looking at sulfur levels throughout the season, and 3 weeks in a row that sulfur was dropping. After the third week is probably when the agronomist decided that some decision or some amendment needed to be made. And you can see the levels kick back up thereafter, right? So in row crops, having a sampling program in place ensures that every pass in the field is maximized. In high management crops like potatoes, or horticulture crops, it's kind of like the standard because those crops are such heavy feeders and growers usually have the means to tend to the nutrient needs a little bit more closely. Again, this is what I was talking about earlier. So field trials are a part of ag. There's no way around it. It's one of the best ways to kind of justify applying products at a larger scale the following season. But if your only metric for success on these trials is yield, it's kind of hard to showcase the effectiveness of the product being trialed because there's so many other variables that it could impact yield. So if you have a product that says, hey, we can boost your nitrogen levels by X amount, and you show nitrogen levels being boosted by X amount, then it kind of becomes pretty intuitive for the grower to understand what's going on. So seeing the control and the test side by side. And our platform, by the way, handles all of this for you. And you'll see in some examples later on how it does that. But all the data is managed so that you don't have to worry about, rummaging through Excel reports and coming up with your own side-by-side comparisons. This is all done automatically. And then the final program would be a precision ag program. So if you want to take this to an extreme, you can sample multiple locations in the same field in line with usually predetermined zones. Labor force is a limiting factor here, of course, but it's really cool to look at once you do have the data points or the points in the field sampled. This field in particular, I sampled myself 2 years ago. Took us about 30 minutes to sample the field. It's a pretty small field, but you do get some interesting results. So once the data hits the platform, we're able to draw a variability map and really look at that overlaid with maybe soil data or NDVI indexes and, get as much data as your heart desires. So if tissue analysis wasn't, let's say you remove all logistical constraints and real world bindings, if you will, if you could just do as many tissue tests as you could, as your heart desired, which one of these would you see yourself implementing in your own operations? And I'll send the poll question right now. I think there's a happy medium between, just a one-off measurement and, tissue sampling every single day. And you guys probably have your own opinions on the most effective strategies, but it'd be interesting to see what the audience thinks the most effective strategy should be. Right on. I'll let you guys answer that for a little bit longer and I'll present the next slide and then I'll hand it over to Shawn. The point that we want to make is that tissue analysis in real time with our lens system integrates into an agronomist's workflow as the season progresses. For me, I don't come from an ag background. I've been at this for 4 years now, but it's always amazed me how the job of an agronomist changes from week to week or even from day to day. So if you picture yourself in 3 months from now and you're in pre-season and you're sitting down with your growers, developing a plan of attack for the season, while having tissue data from the previous years or the previous years that particular field was planted with the crop that's going to go on it this year could be helpful and let you be proactive with your planning. Then at planting, when you're doing your field visits, this is a good time to start tracking nutrient uptake, right? In those key growth stages. Again, mid-season, you're going to go to those fields anyways. So making some adjustments that are backed by a tissue test would really fit into where you're at that point. And then in the late season, once the crop's starting to come in and you're sitting down with your growers to review performance, having access to the data of the having access to the nutrient data as it progresses through the season is a perfect way to kind of plan for the following year. And I'll send you the results right now. And we see that the majority of the audience seems to think that periodic tissue testing is king, and I would have to agree. So I know that was a little bit of word vomit. I tried to get on to all the points that I wanted to make as quickly as possible because the real meat and potatoes of the presentation is Shawn here. So I'll hand the mic over to Shawn, and I'll let you get into your part of this slide deck. Thanks, Shawn.
Perfect. You can hear me, Zach? Excellent. Great.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Thanks for the invite. I appreciate being here. It doesn't look like it, but I've been an ag professional for over 30 years. and the last 3 years as Director of Commercial Growth and Strategy for Eastern Canada with CanGrow Crop Solutions. CanGrow is a family-owned fluid fertilizer manufacturer. We're located just outside of Alvinston, Ontario, between London and Sarnia. We manufacture and sell liquid starters, side dress, foliars, biologicals, biostimulants, kind of whatever you need on the farm to ag retails and farms across Canada and the northeastern United States. So I first heard about Picketa 3 years ago at a trade show. And I'm pretty sure it was you, Zach, that I talked to at that trade show. And at the time, I thought it was a really interesting and innovative technology, something that could potentially benefit our customer base. Then in 2024, when the Picketa team added corn as a scannable crop along with potatoes, our team decided to jump in since a large part of our business and customers work within these two crops. So our hope in working with Picketa was really that we can more accurately diagnose and measure what was going on in our customers' fields to provide them the best management solutions and address yield limiting issues, deficiencies, unforeseen weather or stress events, and at the end of the day, just help our customers grow the best crop they can. And that's where the quote you can see on the screen there, you can't manage what you can't diagnose and measure. That's where it comes from. We're really trying to take some of the guesswork that often goes with agronomic decisions and recommendations. So there were several ways that CanGrow, let me go to the next slide here. There were several ways that CanGrow used the Picketa system last year, and the majority of the tissues that we collected were just ahead of a planned application of either a herbicide, fungicide, or side dress. So we used the results from those scans as a crop health check to make sure that the plants were nutritionally where they needed to be. And if an issue was detected, then we could correct it by adding what was needed with that planned application, basically giving the nutritional or stress package a free ride across the field. We also used it in making nutrient comparisons, as Zach mentioned earlier, taking tissues from two separate areas in a field, whether it was a good versus poor looking area, or an area that actually showed a visual deficiency versus an area that didn't, comparing zones that had different management practices, and even in some cases looking at product comparisons to see what the impact from those treatments were and what influence they had on the nutrient uptake in leaf tissue. So we also had customers who wanted a more in-depth look at how nutrients changed throughout the season. So we had a program where growers could sign up for a weekly tissue scan, which was our recommendation and Picketa's recommendation for potatoes, or every other week scans for corn, which we do throughout the season. And some of our highlights from 2024 in southwestern Ontario, we had record-breaking rainfall early season in spring and summer. And so with the Picketa lens, we were able to identify and address potential yield-limiting issues, especially for some of the more leachable nutrients like sulfur and boron. And in many cases, we were able to track what something like a $3 boron application meant in terms of yield response and return on investment. We also work with a lot of a product called Bioline fulvic acid, and fulvics help increase the uptake and cycling of nutrients within the plant. So we use the Picketa to help quantify how a product like Bioline fulvic plus sulfur treated and compared to just sulfur alone. We could monitor how quickly and by how much we were able to change corn sulfur tissue levels after those applications. So a lot of product comparisons and being able to validate some science behind some of the products that we have at our company. We knew right from the very first scan we did in 2024 at the start of the season that we'd made the right decision to work with Picketa. In the middle of May, at our first use of the lens, we went to we held an event with a retail partner, and they invited customers to bring in corn leaves for scanning. So as we were scanning our very first leaves, the grower was telling us about the history of the field. It was a low CEC, sandy soil, which consistently over the years had shown zinc, boron, and manganese deficiencies in the past with tissues they'd sent to the lab, and he knew the soil tests were low. When the results popped up after we did the last leaf scan, it showed zinc, boron, and sulfur were low, but not manganese. So as we were scratching our heads and trying to talk with the grower and figure out and explain the results, he suddenly remembered that this year he'd put manganese in his corn starter for the very first time. So right away, the very first scan we did in the season, the results of what we saw mirrored what we expected to see. And all the farmers that were there at that event were very impressed with the speed of the analysis and the overall results. As an agronomist, what I really like about using Picketa is that many nutrients can look alike, as Zach put in that very first slide that was sulfur, but how many times, those visual symptoms you use to diagnose a deficiency, we might be getting it wrong, or we might be missing other hidden or masked issues. Is that yellowing actually sulfur, or is it nitrogen? Is it magnesium, manganese, or combinations of all of those? With the Picketa system, we found that we could ensure that we were addressing the right nutrients when we needed to. On this slide is an example of a scan we took just ahead of side dress corn application. And the grower usually only used UAN to side dress, but when we looked at the tissues, sulfur, boron, and potassium were also limiting. We took a look at the soil test, K, and it was in the lower zone, around 100 parts per million. And then the grower remembered that this field did not get a potash application last fall. So right away, looking at the results, he was going in with the side dresser. We added a liquid K-mate product and some boron with the UAN application, and the grower ended up with the record yield on his farm that year. So just a quick example of how we could measure and influence in-season management decisions pretty quickly. In this example, we looked at a good growing area versus a poor growing area in a potato field. We could see several nutrients showing similar deficiency levels in both areas, good and poor, throughout the season. And we addressed those as we could through foliars and fertigation. But at the end of the season, we went back and looked at all the tissue scans, and the real difference between the poor side and the better side was that the poor side showed a faster drop in both nitrogen and sulfur compared to the good areas. So as it turns out, that poor side was a lighter textured part of the field, lower CEC, not able to hold or mineralize nutrients as well. So knowing all this info, we can work with the grower and come up with an action plan going forward, such as soil amendments or cover crops, but things to more focus on that poor area to bring up its overall production. And one of the benefits we liked with the Picketa when we use this approach at those structured and scheduled scans is we can do this at the end of the season review for all of our customers and have that conversation about how to interpret the information, look back, and see what potential management practices we may want to make or change in the following years. Here's a good example. We were looking at a good versus poor area in corn this time, and both areas showed the same deficiencies from a nutrient and micronutrient perspective across both, but consistently the poor area always showed just a little bit worse in all of the different nutrients. And this highlights the importance of also ground truthing tissue results, because when we look closer at the field, it was planted into some tougher soil conditions, and the field did get a heavy rain shortly after planting. The better drained areas is where the field looked pretty good overall, while the heavier soil, poorer drained areas, that's where the visual yellowing and stunting was mostly occurring. So what we did, we recommended to hit the entire field with a product we make called Max Impact, plus additional Bioline Fulvic to stimulate some root growth, address the deficiencies that the Picketa identified in both areas, but then reduce the overall stress from that waterlogged, more saturated soil conditions. And the plants did recover quickly and yields came off very, very strong. As I said, this is my preferred way to work with growers using the Picketa system. I would say about half our samples last year were taken as a spot treatment in the field just ahead of an application, and half of the customers we worked with, we did scheduled applications in both corn and potatoes. And taking several samples through the season, this just allows us to monitor how the weather, plant and growth stage, and nutrients all come together over time. With these results, we could see through the season how nitrogen levels in the plant trended through the season based on weather or applications. We could see how potassium levels were crash as the weather turned drier and drier. And we could also see in areas that got a lot of rainfall through a certain period, we could see that those leachable nutrients like boron and sulfur would continue to decline. Here in this weekly corn scan, we can see the impact of the side dress application from nitrogen made right around that middle of June at 5 leaf, and then track how the corn nitrate uptake would go through the rest of the season. Our key takeaways after using the Picketa lens this last season: it's a great tool that helped us and our customers manage in-season, potentially yield impacting nutrient concerns. It goes along, it's another piece of information to add in that whole agronomic puzzle, along with soil samples and field history, weather and feet on the ground, just to come up with the best recommendations and solutions that we can for farmers. We were really impressed with the Picketa team's responsiveness to questions, in-season issues, and even at the end of the year, suggestions to modify and improve their system based on what we thought we needed to suit what our farmers were looking for. And we made several suggestions on things such as adding note pages to the platform, where we could add field pics or notes, as well as specific product recommendations, and then also asked to have certain notification alerts that actually went to a sales rep or to a customer when a new scan was uploaded. So I'm hoping that those improvements are still scheduled to be implemented in the future, right, Zach? So, and then I'm really looking. Perfect. That's good to hear. Not to put you on the spot or anything, but I'm really looking forward to expanding our program with Picketa in 2025 and continue to find new ways to use the system. It's pretty, you can get out of it as much as you want to, I think, in a lot of cases, and improve our customer recommendations. And I'm really excited to see hopefully future crop capabilities such as soybeans and cereals in future years.
Cool, Shawn. I mean, if your testimonial got any better, people would start thinking you work for Picketa. So thanks for taking the time and for all the good examples and putting things into context for everyone. That's always super helpful. And Shawn has been really, really supportive, and him being here today is kind of a testament to that. So we really appreciate you, Shawn, and we look forward to keeping that going. And we do have a lot of features planned out. So keeping our user base in the loop is always top priority when it comes to development of the product. So really good. I only have one more slide, and it's just reiterating kind of what the three main points that we see how tissue analysis and the lens is transforming the way agronomists work, kind of in reference to what Shawn talked about. So the first kind of main point is that once tissue analysis is part of your workflow and it's leveraged to its maximum, it is a way to proactively manage risk. So you see that nutrient deficiencies can be caught earlier, and it allows you to protect your growers' yields by implementing appropriate management strategies. I think you guys as agronomists and CCAs have all the knowledge that's necessary. It's just a matter of contextualizing what's happening. And once you have enough context cues, you can make an effective recommendation at that time. And that goes into real-time insights. Having instant field data validates kind of what your assumptions might be. And it makes things more clear for everyone involved in making a decision. It also strengthens, I'm sure Shawn could attest to this, but grower relationships. It is a big thing to keep your growers happy and, to let them know that you're doing everything you can to help them reach their goals. So having this extra data point that opens up conversations with your growers and lets you kind of be on the same team when it comes to making a decision is a big proponent of why the lens is making a difference. And then all that ties into what the future of ag retail is looking like now. Like I said, with farming not getting any easier from an economic standpoint, high touch, high service driven agronomy is kind of what agronomists have to resort to, since it's so hard for these growers to hold on to these tight margins, and there's so many uncertainties. So definitely for an ag retailer, an agronomist, or a CCA, having an extra data point to keep growers in the loop is always a plus, especially if it can make sense economically. So that's all we had for you guys today in terms of slide content material. Our focus was mostly on opening up a conversation around tissue analysis and getting some feedback from what the audience thinks tissue analysis needs to look like in the future to be a viable tool. I see that we have quite a bit of questions here. I will let Max, who's the question moderator, kind of pick and choose which ones he wants, and then we can get to answering them.
Yes, we actually do have a lot of questions, so we'll go ahead and get started. And the first question is, how do you market lens against SAP testing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And SAP testing is also something that's becoming more prevalent. And I'll say even in the 4 years that we've been developing the lens, SAP testing has become more and more of a thing. So SAP testing, from my understanding, and Shawn, correct me if I'm wrong, or somebody in the audience, correct me if I'm wrong, but you basically pick a mature leaf and a new leaf, and then you measure the difference in between the two, and that gives you a sense of how the nutrients are flowing through the crop or through the plant, which kind of shows you what can happen in the future. Is that about right, Shawn?
Yeah, I think the other important point is SAP is kind of what's happening in the plant right now today, whereas any tissue test is kind of what's happened nutritionally in the last week in that plant. So it's kind of a now look versus the last week look.
Exactly. And then the way that Picketa kind of navigates around that, or the lens technology navigates around that, is that by implementing a regular tissue test, you're getting a sense of how the nutrients are flowing through the plant from a week-to-week basis, which is in the end giving you the same insight as a SAP test would. The other downside with SAP analysis is that it's not readily available and it's quite expensive to conduct. Our system correlates with any analysis method. Like, we chose to correlate to lab analysis, traditional tissue tests. If SAP analysis would have been the standard and readily available in our area, we could have correlated our sensor to estimate based on SAP tests. But it's just not something that was possible. I think when we started back in 2020, like, SAP tests were either done at one university in Canada, or it was sending the sample to Europe was the next option. So, yeah.
All right. Our next question is, well, we have a couple questions about the nutrient sufficiency ranges. So the first one is, what is your source for the nutrient sufficiency ranges? And do you use one leaf for the sample or multiple leaves and then average them?
Yeah. Okay. So the first part of the question, the nutrient sufficiency levels, those that are on the platform right now, and the good, bad, and over that you saw, those are all based on readily available sources that we found online and we just plugged into the platform. Since doing that, we've developed a new feature that allows our users to implement their own. Sufficiency levels are always a high contention subject. Everyone has different levels. I mean, here on the East Coast of Canada, when we started in potatoes, the sufficiency levels that are used, I think, were derived from tests in Idaho or somewhere in the Midwest in the 80s. And this is still what growers use as sufficiency levels now. Our hope is that with more tissue tests being done and more yield monitors and yield data gathered with relation to those tissue tests, we'll be able to derive sufficiency levels that are representative to each growing area. We're not there yet, but I think sufficiency levels are up for interpretation, and we want our users to use their own. In terms of how many leaves we need to scan, averaging out leaves is exactly how we do it. So to collect a sample that you're going to scan with the lens, all you need to do is go to your sampling location in the field, grab one leaf from 10 plants in your sampling area, the same leaf, obviously, and this is all following a sampling protocol. Once you've collected the leaves in question, you bring them back to the sensor, you scan them all, the system averages out all the information you just scanned, sends it up to our cloud platform, the analysis happens, and the results are available shortly after.
All right. The second part of another question about sufficiency ranges is, will the ranges continue to change as you get more data into the system?
Yeah, that's the hope. Right now, our analysis isn't tied to sufficiency ranges in any way. We'd like sufficiency ranges to be more representative of different growing conditions, but right now they're disconnected. If there's a way for us to, let's say, have access to yield data and conduct a long-term study in a specific geography that would allow us to change sufficiency levels, we'd be up for it. But right now, we leave it up to the users to determine what is a good, what is a sufficient, what is a deficient level in the specific crop they're looking at.
Okay. All right. Another, probably a very good question is, just walk us through, like, how long does it take to process a sample? What's the protocol? How long does it take to get results back?
Yeah, every crop has a different protocol, and we even leave it up to our users to decide on some of those things. What we recommend through our sampling protocol, and I'll run through what it looks like for corn. So for corn, we recommend to pick one sampling area in the field, to go back to that area every time and pick an area that's representative of the field conditions. That's the first thing. Once your area is selected, You go to the sampling area, you grab the plant material that's needed for the specific growth stage that you're at. I think before V5, it's a whole plant sample. After V5, it's the most recently matured leaf with a full collar on it. Once you grab that leaf and you bring it with you, you grab 10 of them for a sample. Once you have your 10 leaves, you bring them back to the sensor. The sensor can either be operated in the back of the pickup truck on the tailgate, or it can be operated in a central location like an office or the agronomy building that you work out of. Once you have the plant material in front of the sensor, you place the plant material on the working surface, you grab the probe, you put it on the plant material, you click scan. You do this for all 10 leaves. This takes around 2 minutes. Once that's done, you just press upload and you get your result within 20 to 30 seconds thereafter.
Yeah, I was going to say that's pretty quick. It took our intern probably 3 minutes to go through 10 to 15 leaves, and then to your point, Zach, as soon as you get on the platform, on the field book platform, then the results are there immediately, and we could forward them over to our customers right away. Our approach, we had at the start of the season wanted to maybe have it mobile to go out to the field, but we found that it worked so much better when we could send our intern out on a route and collect 30 samples, 40 samples, and come back to the office and just run through them all in a very streamlined, very quick fashion. So we were trying to do more volume, and having a central office and having the ability for customers to drop samples off right at your office or pick them up was beneficial for us this last year.
Absolutely, and it's my favorite way to do it as well. Whenever we're doing research projects, trying to add more crops to the system, having it in a central office allows us to, one, have multiple samplers working with the same hardware. So myself and my research partners can go off our separate ways and collect samples and bring them back, and then use the sensor to scan either myself or someone else. It also means that I'm not imposing different variables in the scanning process. So if you're doing it outside, it might be windy, it might be humid, it might be sunny, which are all things that can interfere with the hardware performance and make things a little bit harder for the system to analyze.
How does it work with specialty crops, or does the system work with specialty crops?
Yeah, specialty crops, I feel like, or our feeling is that specialty crops in horticulture are where a lot of tissue testing would be beneficial. The issue is for us volume and access to crops. So to get our system operating in any new crop, we first need to build a calibration data set for it. What that involves is grabbing a regular tissue sample, scanning it, and then sending that same sampling material to a lab. So then we can build a data set of our system scan information comparing to the lab analysis for that same sample. And then once we've done that about 100 times or 200-300 times across a couple different seasons, for some crops it was quicker than others, but let's just say 500 validated scans. At that point, the system is then smart enough to do it on its own, but we need to go through that calibration phase. So in our area specifically, specialty crops like, let's say, carrots, and we're building a data set for carrots right now, but they're few and far between. There's not a ton of carrot producers around us. So finding research partners and conducting those calibration efforts has been one of our biggest endeavors so far, but we're looking to add crops consistently. So we rolled the system out with potatoes. We've since added corn, onion, and canola to the capacity, and then we're looking to add soybeans and wheat cereal next season.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Shawn, I have a question for you as you're working with customers. How do you handle situations where the lens data provides unexpected or contradictory results?
Well, I think it's important to have that conversation with the grower that we're dealing with complex systems, biological, chemical, structural. No system is perfect. It doesn't matter whether it's a sap or a tissue sample from a lab. We always like to back off and validate. If we see something that stands out within the Picketa sample, we'll ask the grower, let's go back and look at your soil samples. Does that low potassium correlate to low soil test levels? And then have that conversation about what management practices happen. So wherever we can layer in more information, I think that's when we find we're making the best recommendations as possible in the field. And in some cases too, we have to look at what the cost of a potential solution is and what we think the potential payback is as well. So we're just trying to make the best recommendations based on as much information as we can.
Okay. Here's another one for you, Shawn. What are you seeing in terms of growers' willingness to invest in tissue analysis, just given current market pressures like low commodity prices and high input costs?
Yeah, great question. I would say within our customer base at CanGrow, we're seeing people really looking to a solution like Picketa, and mostly because land is expensive, seed's expensive, land rent is crazy in a lot of areas, not just Ontario, I believe. But what a lot of growers know is that if they spread 300 pounds of P&K on a field, they might get 30% of the value of that fertilizer when they're farming it. And the next year, if they get outbid by $10 or $15, it's the next land owner or the guy that's running that farm is going to get 70% of that value. So I think a lot of customers out there are looking for, how can I manage this crop this year to the best ability I can? And that's where the Picketa system, I think, really comes in to help address those issues and really fix potential. I look back to the barrel and the law of sufficiency. So if you're adding all the nitrogen you want out there, but boron is your limiting factor, maybe you're only getting 70% of your efficiency and efficacy out of your nitrogen because you're not adding enough boron there. So that's what we're trying to do, is look at the efficiencies and make sure we're addressing nutrients where it makes sense and to maximize the production.
Okay. All right. Our next question is, how does Lens work? Is it light reflectance? Does it work on model memory or NDVI?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a reflectance-based system. So we have a set of certain bandwidth of light that we'll be looking at with our hardware. The hardware shines light on the plant sample, measures how much light bounces back. And from that measurement, we're able to train our an AI model or an ML model from that to evaluate the nutrient content in the sample itself. So the system is good at estimating the nutrient content in a sample off of that measurement alone, since it's correlated to its nutrient content.
Okay. All right. Here's another one here for Shawn. For corn, do you select a small sampling area like suggested in the Picketa protocol? That's hard to say. Picketa protocol, where you sample each time, or do you randomly select in the field at large? And they're also wondering about potatoes. So corn and potatoes, how do you go ahead and sample those?
Yeah, very similar, especially when we're doing those scheduled weekly or biweekly scans. We want to go back to the same area. So we'll put a flag in a field and take leaf samples within a circle of that area. We try to pick a representative part of the field, not the highest yielding spot, not the lowest yielding spot, but more representative of the entire field. So because that's, from a management perspective, that's how they're managing that field and that crop, is based on the average of the field. That would be most of it. So we're trying to go back to the same area. We're trying to do that on a regular basis at the same time too of day. One of the things we did, we scheduled our intern to be in the same area every week so that we weren't taking scans in the morning versus night, or we were trying to make sure we took some of the variables out of the scanning process that might have occurred.
Okay. All right. You mentioned an intern, Shawn. That was another question. Someone wanted to know, what kind of support do you need to have to manage this tissue testing program?
Yeah, for us, because we're across a wide geography in Ontario here, we had an intern that was dedicated to going out, collecting samples. And in some cases, we would just go to a farm and collect a sample. The grower had picked it himself and left it in his shop fridge. And we would just go grab it and bring it back to the lab. The intern had a cooler, and we threw all the samples into the cooler. And on her route at the end of the day, she'd come back to the office and would run through the scans. And the grower would have those results then within a couple hours of us picking them up and getting it back to the office. So an intern, we did 600 scans, I believe, in corn and potatoes this last year. So 600 tissue samples total. And to do that kind of volume, It's a lot of work, but you can get through them very fast with a good intern in person. So in some cases, the intern would go to the field and actually take the sample, and there was a cost associated with that, where the grower wanted that done. But in a lot of cases, we would just go to the farm and grab it out of the shop fridge and bring it back to the office.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that having an intern dedicated to tissue sampling makes sense if the lens is available, because I know a lot of tissue sampling programs right now with traditional methods, your sampling window is actually only at the start of the week, because if you want to get your results by the end of that week, they have to be sent to the lab before Wednesday, Thursday. Having the lens lets you spread out your tissue sampling throughout the week. So you can have 20 Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Wednesday, and then you're spread out. You're not constrained to sending them in before a certain date. So it is a good responsibility for an intern to handle, and the system doesn't need any in-depth technical training to operate. Like, once you understand how it works, it can be done pretty efficiently by pretty much anyone.
All right. We've got time for probably one or two more questions. Someone's asking about what kind of ROI have you observed from using lens, and what metrics do you track to measure its impact? For either of you, I guess.
I can let Shawn answer that specific to CanGrow, but what we're seeing is the cost of implementing the system right now sits at about $2 to $3 an acre for a grower. So if you're able to justify that cost as part of your management fee, if you manage per acre, that's a good way to look at it. So recovery happens, I think, from the service itself, and then the ROI happens thereafter, whether you're a retailer or a consultant. But I'll let Shawn get into more detail with that.
Yeah, when we looked at our foliar sales in particular, they did increase slightly year over year, but it was more the portfolio changed a little bit. So, for example, in the past, the grower might have used just maybe a $12 crop booster type spray across the field, a general NPK plus micros. And based on the scans, instead of that $12, it might have been a $3 boron application that we went with instead. So we were able to put the input dollars in the right spots, I find, and be able to save the grower money and get more results, because a lot of times that general crop booster type product didn't have boron in it. But that's what, based on the tissues that they were needing. You might have seen in the past, the grower might have seen a visual response from that other type of product they were using, but visual maybe only, and not driving yield, which at the end of the day is what we're all here for and trying to do, is drive the best crops and best yield we can.
All right. And we've got quite a few questions, but we're running out of time. So I guess I'll just finish with someone asked, where can I learn more about this? And then you can follow up, hopefully, with the people that haven't had their questions answered yet. But so where can they learn more about it?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I'll have access to all the unanswered questions, so I can reach back out personally to go over them. But if you want to reach out and just learn more and see if this would be a fit for you guys, we have a contact form on our website on the contact us section of Picketa.com. I fill out the form, and that gets sent directly to my inbox. If you want to go straight to the source, you can just send an email over to Zach@Picketa.com. That's just ZACH@Picketa.com. We'd love to get a conversation going, learn more about your specific needs, and if a plant tissue sensor is the right fit for your operation.
All right. Well, I guess I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the webinar, since we've hit our hour time limit. I want to remind everyone that an on-demand version of this webinar will be archived in the next few hours, and will be available at the same link that you used to log on today. And you'll also get an email tomorrow with that same link. So if you want to go back and rewatch anything or check on a fact or something, that's always available. And you can also find the link at CropLife.com/webinars, where all of our webinars are kept. For those who are looking for CEU credit, remember to do not close your browser before the event is fully ended, or you won't get the email with the QR code. So, and this is also for viewers watching the archived webinar. So that's an important point. So I want to thank Shawn and Zach for providing all this information, and thank the audience for joining us today. And thank you to Picketa Systems for making the webinar possible. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much.